Kim Han stood at the back of the shuttle, watching the stars pass by through the small window. He was the youngest member of the human delegation, and everyone had made sure he knew his place. He was not important. He was not special. He was just there to carry bags and take notes. The shuttle was heading toward the Velen homeworld, a planet called Sira. It was beautiful from space, covered in silver oceans and purple forests. The Velen people had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They were tall, elegant beings with skin that shimmered like pearl and eyes that glowed soft blue. They considered themselves the most civilized species in existence. Humans, on the other hand, had only discovered faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. To the Velens, humans were like children who had just learned to walk. Interesting, perhaps, but not worth much attention. Hyan did not mind being overlooked. He had spent his whole life being overlooked. Growing up in a small town on Earth, he had been a quiet boy who preferred books to sports. His parents had been teachers at a school for deaf children, and Hyan had learned sign language before he learned to speak. It was his first language, the language of his heart. When he was older, he studied alien cultures at university. He wanted to understand how different beings thought and lived. His professor said he had a gift for languages. He could learn new ways of speaking faster than anyone they had ever seen. But gifts did not matter much when you came from a poor family with no connections. The only reason Hyan was on this delegation was because someone had gotten sick at the last moment. Ambassador Park, the leader of the group, had needed someone who could take notes quickly and stay quiet. Hyan was perfect for that job. He was always quiet. Remember, Ambassador Park had told him before they left Earth, "You do not speak unless I tell you to speak. You do not look at the Velens unless they look at you first. You stand in the back and you write down everything that happens. Do you understand?" Hyan had nodded. He understood very well. The shuttle landed on a platform made of white stone that seemed to glow from within. Velen guards stood in perfect rows, their silver armor reflecting the light of their two suns. They were so still that they looked like statues. Ambassador Park walked down the ramp first, followed by his senior advisors. Hyan came last, carrying a bag full of documents and a small tablet for taking notes. He kept his eyes down, just as he had been told. A Velen official met them at the bottom of the ramp. He was very tall, even for a Velen, and his robes were the color of deep space, covered in tiny lights that looked like stars. His name was Lord Taiho, and he was the Empress's chief advisor. "Welcome to Sira," Lord Taiho said. His voice was like music, each word carrying multiple tones that seemed to hang in the air. "The Empress will see you in the Grand Hall. Please follow me." They walked through corridors made of crystalline light. Everything on Sira was beautiful in a cold, perfect way. There were no stains, no cracks, no signs that anyone actually lived here. It was like walking through a museum. Hyan noticed that the Velen servants they passed did not look at them. They kept their eyes forward and their faces blank. He wondered if they had been told to ignore the humans, or if they simply did not care. The Grand Hall was the largest room Hyan had ever seen. The ceiling was so high that clouds actually formed near the top. Pillars of crystal held up the roof, and between them hung tapestries that showed the history of the Velen Empire. Thousands of years of conquest and culture, all displayed in silver and gold thread. At the far end of the hall sat the throne. And on the throne sat Empress Nari. She was the most powerful being in this part of the galaxy. Under her rule, the Velen Empire controlled over 200 star systems. Her word was law for billions of beings. And yet, looking at her, Hyan thought she looked tired. Her skin was paler than the other Velens, and there were shadows under her glowing eyes. Her robes were magnificent, covered in jewels that sparkled like captured stars, but they seemed to weigh her down. She sat very straight, as if she was afraid that if she relaxed for even a moment, everything would fall apart. "Approach," she said, and her voice filled the entire hall without seeming loud. Ambassador Park walked forward and bowed deeply. His advisors did the same. Hyan stayed at the back of the group, his head lowered, his tablet ready. "Your Imperial Majesty," Ambassador Park said, "we are honored beyond words to stand in your presence. Earth sends its deepest respects and hopes that this meeting will begin a new era of friendship between our peoples." The Empress nodded slightly. "We have received your proposals for trade agreements. They are acceptable as a starting point for discussion." This was good news. Hyan knew that getting the villains to even consider trade with humans was a major achievement. Most species in the galaxy thought humans were too young, too aggressive, too unpredictable to be trusted. The formal greetings continued for what felt like hours. Ambassador Park spoke in careful, rehearsed phrases. The Empress responded with even more careful phrases. Nothing real was being said, but that was how diplomacy worked. The real conversations would happen later, in private rooms, away from watching eyes. Hyan wrote down everything, his stylus moving quickly across his tablet. He noted the names of the Velen officials who stood near the throne. He noted which ones seemed friendly and which ones seemed hostile. He noted that Lord Taiho never smiled, not even once. And then he noticed the girl. She was sitting on a smaller chair, set slightly behind and to the left of the throne. She was young, perhaps 12 or 13 years old in human terms. She wore simple white robes, not the elaborate clothes of the other royals. Her hair was long and dark, falling over her face like a curtain she was trying to hide behind. No one was looking at her. No one was speaking to her. She sat completely alone, even though she was surrounded by hundreds of people. Hyan watched her for a moment longer. She was staring at the floor, her hands folded in her lap. Every now and then, her fingers would move in small, restless patterns. She looked like a bird trapped in a cage, dreaming of the sky. He wondered who she was. A servant? A minor noble? But no, her position was too close to the throne for that. She had to be someone important. Lord Taiho noticed Hyan looking. His blue eyes narrowed, and he made a small gesture to one of the guards. The guard moved to block Hyan's view of the girl. Hyan quickly looked back down at his tablet. He had already broken the rule about not looking at things he should not look at. He did not want to cause any more trouble. The formal meeting ended as the suns began to set. The sky outside the crystal walls turned from silver to deep purple. Ambassador Park and his team were led to guest quarters in a tower that overlooked the palace gardens. The rooms were beautiful, of course. Everything on Syra was beautiful. But they were also cold, and Hyan found it hard to sleep that night. He kept thinking about the girl on the chair, the way her fingers had moved in those restless patterns. He knew those patterns. He had seen them before, long ago, when he was just a child sitting in his parents' classroom. They were the movements of someone who wanted to speak but had no one to listen. The next morning, Ambassador Park gathered everyone for a briefing. He was excited, more excited than Hyan had ever seen him. "The Empress has agreed to continue discussions," he announced. "We will have a formal dinner tonight in the Crystal Garden. This is our chance to make a real impression. Everyone needs to be on their best behavior." He looked directly at Hyan when he said this. "I mean everyone. No mistakes. No accidents. We cannot afford to offend the Velens in any way." Hyan nodded. He had no intention of making any mistakes. He just wanted to do his job and go home. But as he got ready for the dinner that evening, putting on his best clothes and combing his hair, he could not stop thinking about the girl. He had asked one of the other delegates about her, trying to sound casual. "Oh, her," the delegate had said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "That is Princess Yuna, the Empress's only child." Why was she sitting alone? The delegate had looked uncomfortable. She was born different. The Velans communicate through complex sound patterns. Their whole society is built around it. But the princess, he had shaken his head. She cannot hear. She was born deaf. To the Velans, she is broken, worthless. They say the Empress keeps her hidden most of the time, but she was required to attend the formal welcome. Tradition demands it. Hyan had felt something twist in his chest. A princess who could not hear in a world made entirely of sound. He could not imagine how lonely that must be, but there was nothing he could do about it. He was just a note-taker. He was not even supposed to be here. He had to stay quiet and stay invisible. That was what he told himself as he followed the delegation to the Crystal Garden that night. That was what he kept telling himself as he took his place at the back of the human group, his tablet in his hands. Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Do not cause any trouble. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The Crystal Garden was the most beautiful place Hyan had ever seen. It was not a garden in the way humans understood gardens. There were no plants growing from soil, no flowers reaching toward the sun. Instead, there were structures made of pure crystal, shaped like trees and flowers and vines, all glowing with soft inner light. The crystals sang. That was the only way to describe it. Each one produced a gentle tone, and together they created a harmony that filled the air like perfume. The Velans moved through this music like fish swimming through water. They belonged here. This was their world. The humans did not belong. Hyan could feel it in the way the Velan nobles looked at them, with polite smiles that did not reach their eyes. He could feel it in the way conversations stopped when they walked past. They were being tolerated, nothing more. Long tables had been set up in the center of the garden, covered with food that glowed and sparkled. Hyan did not know what any of it was. He'd been warned not to eat anything unless Ambassador Park said it was safe. The human delegation was seated at one end of the main table, far from the Empress and her closest advisors. This was not an insult, exactly. It was simply their place. They were guests, but they were not important guests. Hyan found his seat at the very end, almost behind a crystal tree. He was so far from the main conversation that he could barely hear what was being said. But that was fine. He could still see everything, and he could still write his notes. The dinner began with speeches. Lord Taiho welcomed the human delegation again, using many beautiful words that meant very little. Ambassador Park responded with his own beautiful, meaningless words. The Velan nobles clapped politely. The humans clapped politely. Nothing real was happening. Hyan let his eyes wander around the garden. He watched the Velan servants move silently between the tables, filling glasses with glowing liquid. He watched the nobles laugh at jokes he could not hear. He watched the crystal flowers pulse with light in time with the music. And then he saw her, again. Princess Yuna was sitting at a small table near the edge of the garden, separated from everyone else by a wall of crystal flowers. She was alone. Except for a single servant who stood behind her chair, not looking at her, not speaking to her. She was not eating. The food in front of her sat untouched, growing cold. Her hands were in her lap again, her fingers moving in those same restless patterns. She was staring at the table, her face completely blank. Hyan felt his heart break a little. He knew that look. He had seen it on the faces of the deaf children at his parents' school, the ones who had not yet learned that they could communicate, that they could connect with others. It was the look of someone who believed they were completely and utterly alone in the world. He watched as a group of young Velan nobles walked past her table. They did not acknowledge her. They did not even look at her. It was as if she was not there at all. One of the nobles said something, and the others laughed. Hyan could not hear what was said, but he saw Princess Yuna's shoulders tighten. She had seen them laugh. She knew they were laughing about something, and she probably thought they were laughing at her. They probably were. Hyan gripped his tablet so hard that his fingers hurt. He wanted to stand up and walk over to her. He wanted to tell her that she was not alone, that there were people in the universe who understood, who cared. But he could not. He was nobody. He had been told to stay quiet, so he stayed in his seat, and he watched, and he felt ashamed of his own silence. The dinner continued. Courses came and went. The Velen nobles grew louder as they drank more of the glowing liquid. Ambassador Park was deep in conversation with Lord Taiho, discussing trade routes and resource sharing. Everything was going according to plan. Then something happened. One of the crystal flowers near Princess Yuna's table began to dim. It made a harsh, discordant sound instead of the gentle music it was supposed to produce. A malfunction, perhaps, or maybe it was just old. But the sound drew attention, and suddenly everyone was looking in that direction. They were looking at the princess. Hyan saw her freeze. Her face went pale, even paler than usual. She looked up and saw all those eyes staring at her, and something in her expression crumbled. She tried to stand up, but her foot caught on her chair. She stumbled, knocking over the table. Plates and glasses crashed to the floor, making a terrible noise that echoed through the crystal garden. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then the whispers began. The Velen nobles turned to each other, their voices soft but their faces full of disgust and pity. Poor broken princess. Cannot even sit through a dinner without causing a scene. Such a shame for the empress. Such a burden. Hyan could not hear the words, but he could read the expressions. He knew exactly what they were saying. Princess Yuna stood in the middle of the mess, her white robe stained with spilled food, her face red with humiliation. She was trying not to cry. He could see her fighting to hold back the tears, her small hands clenched into fists at her sides. No one moved to help her. Not the servant who was supposed to be watching her. Not the nobles who were supposed to be her people. Not even the empress, who sat at the head of the table with a face made of stone. She was completely alone. Hyan started to stand up. He did not know what he was going to do. He just knew he could not sit there and watch anymore. But before he could move, Ambassador Park grabbed his arm. "Sit down," the ambassador hissed. "Do not draw attention to yourself. This is not our concern." "But she needs help," Hyan whispered back. "She is a Velen. The Velens will handle their own affairs. We are here to negotiate trade agreements, not to get involved in their internal politics." The ambassador's grip tightened. "Sit down." Hyan sat down. He watched as Princess Yuna finally gathered herself together. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and walked out of the garden with as much dignity as she could manage. No one followed her. No one called out to her. She simply left, and the party continued as if nothing had happened. Within minutes, the broken crystal flower had been removed, and the mess had been cleaned up. The nobles went back to their conversations. The music resumed. Everything was perfect and beautiful again, except it was not. Not for Hyan. He could not stop thinking about the look on Princess Yuna's face as she walked away. The loneliness, the despair, the acceptance that she had expected to be abandoned. She had expected no one to care. And she had been right. Hyan thought about his parents and the school where they had worked. He thought about the children there, and how hard his parents had fought to give them a voice. Sign language was not just a way to communicate. It was a way to connect. It was a way to say, "I see you. You matter. You are not alone." He thought about all the times he had sat in the back of classrooms, overlooked and ignored, and how much it had hurt. And he had been able to hear. He had been able to speak. He had just been shy and poor and unimportant. Princess Yuna was a princess, but she was also deaf in a world of sound. She was surrounded by people, but she was utterly alone. And no one, not a single person in this entire empire, had ever tried to bridge that gap. Because to the Velans, sound was everything. Their language was made of tones and harmonics that humans could barely perceive. Their art was sound. Their science was sound. Their religion was sound. A person who could not hear was not just disabled. They were incomplete. They were broken in a way that could never be fixed. Hyan remembered something his mother had told him once, when he was young and frustrated with how slowly the deaf children learned. Every person has a voice, she had said. Sometimes you just have to find it in a different way. The Velans had never looked for a different way. They had simply given up on their princess, hidden her away, and pretended she did not exist. That night, after the dinner was over and the human delegation had returned to their quarters, Hyan could not sleep. He lay in his cold, beautiful bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about Princess Yuna. He thought about her restless fingers, moving in patterns that no one understood. He thought about her lonely table, separated from everyone else. He thought about the tears she had been too proud to let fall. And he made a decision. He was going to do something. He did not know what yet. He did not know how. But he was not going to let that girl spend another day thinking she was completely alone in the universe. Tomorrow, there would be another formal event. Another chance to see her. Another opportunity. Hyan was not important. He was not special. He had been told to stay quiet and stay invisible. But some things were more important than following orders. Some things were more important than trade agreements and diplomatic relations. Some things were about being human. He finally fell asleep as the twin suns began to rise, their light streaming through the crystal walls of his room. In his dreams, he saw hands moving through the air, forming words without sound, building bridges between worlds. When he woke up, he knew exactly what he was going to do. The morning came too quickly. Hyan had barely slept, but he felt more awake than he had in years. There was fire in his blood, purpose in his heart. He had spent his whole life being quiet, being invisible, being safe. Today, he was going to take a risk. The human delegation gathered for breakfast in a room that overlooked the palace gardens. Ambassador Park was in a good mood. The trade negotiations were going well. The Velans seemed willing to accept most of Earth's proposals. Today is important, the ambassador announced, spreading some kind of purple jam on his bread. We have been invited to attend the Festival of Harmony. It is one of the most sacred events in Velan culture. The entire royal family will be there. We must show respect and appreciation. Hyan listened carefully. The entire royal family. That meant Princess Yuna would be there too. What is the Festival of Harmony? One of the advisors asked. It is a celebration of their sound-based culture, Ambassador Park explained. There will be musical performances, poetry readings, and ceremonial rituals. Everything is done through voice and sound. It is considered the highest form of art. Hyan felt a chill run down his spine. A festival entirely about sound. For Princess Yuna, it would be like being locked in a room full of treasures she could never touch. She would be surrounded by beauty she could never experience. The festival was held in a great amphitheater carved into the side of a mountain. Thousands of Velans filled the seats, their pearl-like skin glowing in the sunlight. The human delegation was given seats near the front, a sign of honor that Ambassador Park was very pleased about. Hyan found his place at the end of the row, as always. He looked around the amphitheater, searching for Princess Yuna. It took him a while to find her. She was sitting in a box near the top of the amphitheater, far from the stage, far from her mother, far from everyone. The box had walls of frosted crystal that partly hid her from view. It was clear that she had been placed there so that no one would have to look at her. Hyan single quotes, as hands clenched into fists. They had brought her to a festival of sound, knowing she could not hear any of it, and then hidden her away like something shameful. It was cruel. It was more than cruel. It was evil. The festival began with a performance by a choir of young villains. Their voices blended together in harmonies that made Hyan's ears ring. It was beautiful, he had to admit. The sound seemed to have colors and shapes, filling the air with impossible patterns. He looked up at Princess Yuna's box. She was sitting very still, her eyes fixed on the stage. She could see the performers moving, their mouths opening and closing, but she could not hear what they were creating. She could not be part of it. More performances followed. Solo singers who could produce sounds that split into multiple notes at once. Musicians playing crystal instruments that amplified their voices into symphonies. Poets who recited verses that seemed to hang in the air like visible words. Each performance was greeted with thunderous applause. Each one was a celebration of everything Princess Yuna could never do. Hyan stopped watching the stage. He watched her instead. She never moved. She never looked away. She sat through performance after performance, her face a perfect mask of calm. But Hyan could see her hands in her lap, her fingers moving in those same restless patterns. She was talking to herself, he realized. Having a conversation that no one else could hear. And in that moment, Hyan understood something important. Princess Yuna had created her own language, without anyone teaching her. Without anyone helping her, she had developed a way to express herself through movement. It was not complete. It was not structured. But it was there. She had found her own voice, just like his mother had always said. She just needed someone to listen. The festival paused for a midday meal. The crowds dispersed to various areas where food had been set up. The human delegation was led to a private pavilion where they could eat away from the villain nobles. Hyan did not go with them. "Where are you going?" Ambassador Park demanded as Hyan started to walk in a different direction. "I need to use the restroom," Hyan lied. The ambassador looked suspicious, but he was too busy talking to Lord Taiho to argue. "Fine, but come back quickly. We cannot afford to offend our hosts by having missing delegates." Hyan nodded and hurried away before anyone could stop him. He made his way through the crowds, trying to look like he belonged. No one paid much attention to him. He was human, which made him strange, but he was also clearly unimportant. The Velen nobles had more interesting things to worry about. He found a servant and asked, in his best attempt at the Velen language, where the princess had been taken for the meal. The servant looked at him strangely, but pointed toward a small garden at the edge of the amphitheater. Hyan walked there as quickly as he could without running. The garden was quiet and empty, except for Princess Yuna and her ever-present servant. The servant stood at the entrance, looking bored. She did not even look at Hyan as he approached. "I would like to speak with the princess," Hyan said. The servant looked at him now, her eyes widening with surprise. "Speak with her? She cannot hear. She cannot understand. Why would you want to speak with her?" "Please," Hyan said. "Just let me try." The servant shrugged. "If you wish to waste your time, that is your choice. But do not upset her. The Empress does not like it when she is upset." Hyan walked past her and into the garden. Princess Yuna was sitting on a bench made of white stone, staring at a fountain that made no sound. Of course it made no sound. Someone had probably turned off the water flow so that she would not be reminded of what she could not hear. She did not notice him at first. He walked closer, his heart pounding in his chest. What was he going to say? What was he going to do? He had not thought this through at all. He stopped a few feet away from her. She still did not look up. Hyan took a deep breath. Then he raised his hands and signed a simple greeting. "Hello, my name is Hyan. What is your name?" Princess Yuna did not move for a long moment. Hyan was afraid she had not seen him. He was afraid she did not understand. He was afraid he had made a terrible mistake. Then, slowly, she looked up. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth was open. She was staring at his hands like they were the most amazing things she had ever seen. Hyan signed again. Can you see me? Can you understand? Princess Yuna's eyes filled with tears. She raised her own hands, trembling, and tried to copy his movements. She did not get them right, but that did not matter. She was trying. She was responding. She was not alone anymore. Hyan sat down on the bench next to her. He signed more slowly this time, using the simplest gestures he knew. I am from Earth. I know a language of hands. I can teach you. Princess Yuna watched his hands with desperate intensity. She was trying so hard to understand, her whole body leaning forward, her eyes never blinking. Hyan pointed to himself. Hyan. He spelled out the letters with his fingers, slowly, one by one. Then he pointed to her. Princess Yuna understood. Her face lit up with a smile so bright that it seemed to make the whole garden glow. She pointed to herself and tried to spell her name, getting some of the letters wrong, but close enough. Y-U-N-A. Hyan nodded, grinning. Yuna, that is beautiful. For the next few minutes, he taught her basic signs. Yes, no, happy, sad, friend. She learned faster than anyone he had ever seen. She was starving for this, he realized. She had been starving for this her whole life. They were so focused on each other that neither of them noticed they were being watched. The servant had come to tell Princess Yuna that the festival was resuming. But she had stopped at the entrance to the garden, frozen in shock. She watched as the human and the princess moved their hands through the air, creating a conversation without sound. She watched as Princess Yuna laughed. The sound of that laugh cut through the garden like a bell. It was the first real sound the princess had made in years. It was not a word. It was just joy, pure and simple, escaping from her lips. The servant turned and ran. She had to tell someone. She had to tell everyone. She had to tell the Empress. Hyan and Princess Yuna did not know any of this. They were too busy building a bridge between their worlds, one sign at a time. They were too busy discovering that they were not so different after all. Hyan showed her the sign for star by making his fingers sparkle like light. He showed her the sign for friend by linking his index fingers together. He showed her the sign for hope by making a small flower bloom from his palm. Princess Yuna copied each sign, her movements becoming more confident with every try. Her tears had dried, but her smile remained. She looked like a different person. She looked alive. Why? She signed finally, the gesture awkward but understandable. Why you help? Hyan thought about the question. Why was he helping? He could get in terrible trouble for this. He could destroy the trade negotiations. He could cause an incident that would set back human-Velen relations for decades. But none of that seemed to matter. Because no one should be alone, he signed. Because everyone deserves a voice. Princess Yuna looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand in both of hers, holding it tightly. Thank you, she said out loud. The words rough and strange because she had never heard how they were supposed to sound. Thank you. Hyan squeezed her hands back. You are welcome. They sat together in the quiet garden, two strangers from different worlds, connected by something that did not need sound to be understood. And neither of them knew that everything was Abo Empress Nari was tired. She had been tired for 13 years, ever since the day her daughter was born into silence. The doctors had told her it was impossible to fix. The priests had told her it was a curse from the gods. The nobles had told her it was a shame that should be hidden. So she had hidden her daughter. Not completely, because tradition demanded that the princess appear at certain events. But she had kept her separate, kept her quiet, kept her out of sight as much as possible. It was easier that way. It was less painful, or so she had told herself. The truth was that every time she looked at Yuna, her heart broke a little more. She remembered holding her as a baby, singing lullabies that her daughter could never hear. She remembered watching her grow up in silence, isolated from everyone around her. She remembered the day Yuna stopped trying to communicate at all, retreating into herself like a flower closing for winter. Nari had failed her daughter. She knew this. She had let the traditions of her people convince her that Yuna was broken, that there was nothing to be done. She had given up Dot, and now, as she sat on her throne watching the Festival of Harmony unfold, she felt the weight of that failure pressing down on her like a physical burden. The festival was beautiful, as it always was. The performers were talented, the music was exquisite, the crowds were appreciative. Everything was perfect, except for the empty box near the top of the amphitheater. Except for her daughter, sitting alone where no one could see her. Except for the silence that surrounded the princess like a prison. Nari was lost in these dark thoughts when a servant appeared at her side. Breathing hard, her eyes wide with shock. "Your Imperial Majesty," the servant gasped. "You must come. You must see. What is it?" Nari asked, her voice cold. She did not like interruptions during the festival. "It is the princess, Your Majesty." The human. "He is." "She is." The servant could not seem to find the words. She just kept pointing toward the edge of the amphitheater, her hands shaking. Nari stood up. The nobles around her fell silent, watching with curious eyes. Lord Taiho moved to her side, his face concerned. "Your Majesty, perhaps I should investigate first," he suggested. "There is no need for you to." "No," Nari said. "I will see for myself." She walked through the crowds, her royal guards clearing a path before her. The nobles whispered as she passed. Something was happening. Something unprecedented. She reached the small garden at the edge of the amphitheater and stopped at the entrance. What she saw there made her forget how to breathe. Her daughter was sitting on a bench with the young human from the Earth delegation. They were moving their hands through the air, creating patterns that seemed to have meaning. And her daughter, her silent, isolated, broken daughter, was smiling. Not just smiling, laughing, making sounds that Nari had not heard since Yuna was a tiny baby. Before the doctors discovered she could not hear. "What is this?" Nari whispered. Lord Taiho was at her side, his face dark with disapproval. "This is highly inappropriate, Your Majesty. The human has approached the princess without permission. He should be punished for." "Be quiet," Nari said. And her voice was so sharp that Lord Taiho actually took a step back. She walked forward, slowly, afraid that if she moved too fast, she would break whatever magic was happening before her eyes. The human noticed her first. He went pale and started to stand up, fear playing on his face. But Yuna grabbed his arm and held him in place. She looked at her mother with defiance in her eyes, a look Nari had never seen before. Yuna raised her hands and made a series of gestures. Then she pointed at the human. Nar. I did not understand the gestures, but she understood the meaning behind them. Her daughter was protecting this stranger. Her daughter was standing up for someone. Her daughter was communicating. "What are you doing to her?" Nari asked the human. "What is this? This movement of hands?" The young man swallowed hard. When he spoke, his voice trembled, but he did not look away from her eyes. "It is called sign language, Your Imperial Majesty. On Earth, we have people who cannot hear. Just like Princess Yuna. Long ago, we developed a way for them to communicate using hand movements instead of sound. I was teaching some of these signs to the princess." Nari stared at him. "You are saying there is a way for her to speak? Without sound?" "Yes, Your Majesty. She can learn to express herself, to understand others, to have conversations. She does not need to be isolated anymore. She does not need to be alone." The young man paused, and then he said something that cut through Nari's heart like a blade. "She was never broken, Your Majesty. She just needed a different kind of voice. Nari felt her eyes fill with tears. She tried to stop them, but she could not. They spilled down her cheeks, falling like stars onto her magnificent robes. Lord Taiho stepped forward, his face scandalized. "Your Majesty, please. This is unseemly. The human has clearly done something to upset you. Let me have him removed." "He has not upset me," Nari said, and her voice broke on the words. "He has given me hope." She walked past Lord Taiho and knelt in front of her daughter. She had not been this close to Yuna in years. She had been too afraid of the pain, too ashamed of her own failure. Now, she reached out and took Yuna's hands in her own. "I am sorry," she said, even though she knew Yuna could not hear her. "I am so sorry." Yuna watched her mother's face. She could not hear the words, but she could see the tears. She could see the pain. She could see something that might have been love. The human. Hyan, that was his name, moved his hands in a series of signs. Yuna watched, then turned back to her mother and made the same signs. It took Nari a moment to understand what was happening. The human was translating for them. He was creating a bridge between a mother and daughter who had not truly spoken in 13 years. "What did she say?" Nari asked, her voice barely a whisper. She said, "Mother, I have been waiting for you." Nari let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. She pulled her daughter into her arms and held her tight, something she had not done since Yuna was a baby. She could feel Yuna's body shaking with silent sobs. Could feel small hands clutching at her robes. They stayed that way for a long time. Mother and daughter finally connected after years of distance. When they finally separated, Nari looked at the young human with new eyes. He was still afraid, she could see. He expected to be punished for his boldness. He expected to be sent away, or worse, instead. She did something that shocked everyone watching. She bowed to him. Empress Nari, ruler of 200 star systems, commander of the greatest fleet in the galaxy, bowed to a lowly human who had been told to stay quiet. "Thank you," she said. "You have given me back my daughter. I do not know how to repay such a gift." Hyan stood very still, his eyes wide. Behind him, Nari could see the other humans gathering at the entrance to the garden. The one who seemed to be in charge, Park something, looked like he was about to faint. "Your Majesty," Hyan said slowly, "I do not need repayment. I only did what anyone should have done. I saw someone who was lonely and I tried to help." "Anyone should have done it," Nari repeated. "But no one did. For 13 years, no one even tried. Not the scholars. Not the healers. Not even me." Her voice grew bitter. "We looked at my daughter, and we saw only what she lacked. We never thought to look for what she had." She turned to the crowd that had gathered behind her. Nobles, servants, guards, all watching with expressions of shock and confusion. "Let this be known throughout the Empire," Nari announced, her voice carrying across the garden like a bell. "The humans have done what we could not. They have found a way to give my daughter a voice. From this day forward, they will be honored as true friends of the Vullan people." The crowd murmured. Some looked pleased. Some looked disturbed. Lord Taiho's face was unreadable, but his eyes were cold. Nari did not care. For the first time in 13 years, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. She felt joy. She felt like a mother again. "Human," she said to Hyan, "what is your name?" "Kim Hyan, Your Majesty." "Hyan." She tasted the name. "You will teach my daughter this language of hands. You will stay here on Sira for as long as necessary. I will provide you with everything you need." Ambassador Park stepped forward, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Your Imperial Majesty, we are deeply honored by this offer. However, Hyan is not. That is to say, he is not a diplomat. He is merely, I do not care what he was," Nari interrupted. I care only about what he is. And what he is the first person in this entire galaxy who saw my daughter as a person worth speaking to. She looked at Hyan again. Will you stay? Will you teach her? Hyan looked at Princess Yuna, who was watching him with pleading eyes. He looked at Ambassador Park, who was frantically trying to figure out how to turn this situation to his advantage. He looked at the crowd of Velan nobles, some of whom seemed ready to kill him, and some of whom seemed ready to worship him. And then he smiled. Yes, Your Majesty. I will stay. Yuna's face lit up with that brilliant smile again. She made a sign that Hyan had taught her earlier, the one for friend. Hyan made the same sign back, and somewhere in the crowd, someone started to clap. Then another person. Then another. Soon the entire garden was filled with applause, a sound of celebration that rose up into the sky like a prayer. The Festival of Harmony had found its true meaning at last. You to change. 1 year had passed as the day in the garden. Hyan stood on the balcony of his quarters in the Velan Palace, watching the twin suns set over the silver ocean. He still could not quite believe this was his life now. A year ago, he had been a nobody, a note-taker, someone who had been told to stay quiet and stay invisible. Now he was the official ambassador for silent communication, a title that Empress Nari had created just for him. His life had changed so much. But the biggest change was not his title or his beautiful rooms, or the respect that people now showed him. The biggest change was Princess Yuna. She was not the same girl he had met in that quiet garden. That girl had been closed off, withdrawn, hidden behind walls of silence and loneliness. This Yuna was bright and curious and full of questions. She had learned sign language faster than anyone Hyan had ever seen. Within 6 months, she was fluent. Within a year, she was teaching others. That was the most amazing part. Yuna had started teaching sign language to others in the palace. First, it was just a few servants who wanted to communicate with her. Then, it was some of the younger nobles who were curious about this new form of expression. Then it was scholars who wanted to study this strange human invention. Now, sign language was spreading across the entire Velan Empire. It turned out that the Velans had been wrong about their deaf citizens. They were not broken or worthless or shameful. They were just different. And once people saw that difference did not mean less, everything began to change. Schools were established for deaf Velans who had been hidden away by their families. Doctors began studying how to help people who could not hear. Artists started creating visual poetry that did not need sound to be beautiful. The empire that had been built on sound was learning that silence had its own kind of voice. Hyan heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Yuna walking onto the balcony. She was 15 now, no longer a child but not yet an adult. She moved with confidence, her head held high, her eyes bright with intelligence and warmth. You are thinking too much again, she sighed, a smile playing at her lips. I can see it on your face. I was thinking about how much things have changed. Hyan sighed back. A year ago, I was nobody. You were never nobody. Yuna came to stand beside him, looking out at the sunset. You were just waiting for someone to see you. The way I was waiting. They stood in comfortable silence for a while. That was one of the things Hyan loved about being with Yuna. They did not need to fill every moment with words. They could simply be together, two people who understood each other. Mother wants to see you, Yuna sighed eventually. She has news. Good news or bad news? Yuna grinned. I think good. She was smiling when she told me to find you. She does not smile for bad news. They walked together through the palace corridors, which were no longer as cold and perfect as they had once seemed. There were flowers now, real flowers, growing in pots along the walls. There were paintings made by deaf artists, showing scenes from stories told in sign. There were children running and laughing, children who a year ago would have been locked away and forgotten. The Empress was in her private study, a room that few people were allowed to enter. She was sitting at a desk covered with documents, but she looked up when Hyan and Yuna came in. Her face was transformed. The tired, sad woman Hyan had met a year ago was gone. In her place was someone who looked younger, lighter, happier. "Hyan," she said, standing to greet him. She still spoke out loud when addressing him, though she was also learning sign language. "Thank you for coming. How may I serve you, Your Majesty?" Hyan asked. "You may sit down and stop being so formal. After everything you have done for my family, you can call me Nari." She smiled. At least in private. Hyan sat in one of the comfortable chairs, still not entirely used to being treated as an equal by an empress. Yuna sat next to him, her hands folded in her lap, waiting to interpret if needed. "I have just received word from the Galactic Council," Nari said. "As you know, humanity has been requesting full membership for the past 50 years. The Council has always refused, saying that humans were too young, too unpredictable, too different." Hyan nodded. This was old news. Earth had been trying to join the Galactic Council since first contact, but the older species kept blocking their admission. "That has changed," Nari continued. "The Council voted last night. Humanity has been granted full membership." Hyan's heart stopped. What? It was not even close. 12 species voted in favor. Only 2 voted against. Nari's smile grew wider. "The Velen Empire led the campaign for your admission. We called in every favor we had. We made speeches about what humans had taught us, about how your compassion and creativity had changed our entire civilization." I do not know what to say," Hyan managed. "You do not need to say anything. You already said everything that mattered, a year ago in a garden, when you chose kindness over obedience." Nari's eyes grew bright with emotion. "You showed us something about humanity that we had not understood before. Your species does not abandon those who are different. You do not give up on people just because they cannot do what everyone else can do. You find other ways." She stood up and walked to a window that looked out over the palace gardens. "In the thousands of years since the Velen Empire began exploring the stars, we have met many species. Some were powerful. Some were intelligent. Some were beautiful beyond description. But none of them, she took a deep breath. None of them looked at my broken daughter and saw a person worth saving." "She was never broken," Hyan said softly. Nari turned to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. "No, she was never broken. We were broken. We were so convinced of our own superiority, so sure that our way was the only way, that we could not see beyond our own limitations." She walked to Yuna and took her daughter's hands in hers. "You taught us that there is more than one kind of voice. You taught us that silence can speak louder than any song. You taught us that the measure of a civilization is not how it treats the strong, but how it treats the weak." Yuna squeezed her mother's hands and signed something that made Nari laugh through her tears. "What did she say?" Hyan asked. "She said that I am being dramatic and that someone should bring cake to celebrate." Nari wiped her eyes. She gets her sense of humor from her father. The celebration that followed was the biggest the palace had ever seen. News of humanity's admission to the Galactic Council spread across the empire, and people from all species came to congratulate Hyan and to thank him for changing their world. But the moment Hyan remembered most clearly came later, after the crowds had gone and the music had faded. He was sitting in the garden where he had first met Yuna, looking up at the stars. Yuna found him there, as she always did. "What are you thinking about now?" She signed. "I am thinking about how strange life is," Hyan signed back. "A year ago, I was told to stay quiet. I was told that I did not matter. I was told that the best thing I could do was be invisible. And if I had listened, none of this would have happened. You would still be alone. Humanity would still be outsiders. Nothing would have changed. Yuna sat down next to him, close enough that their shoulders touched. That is why humans are special, she sighed. You do not always do what you are told. You follow your hearts instead of your orders. Sometimes that causes problems. But sometimes, she smiled, sometimes it changes everything. Hyan looked at her, this princess who had become his student, then his friend, then something like a little sister. I am glad I did not listen, he sighed. I am glad too. They sat together under the stars. Human and Velen speaking a language that needed no sound, connected by bonds that would never be broken. Far above them, somewhere among those countless points of light, Earth was celebrating. The news had reached home. Humanity had finally been accepted as equals among the stars. 50 years of rejection, finally overcome. 50 years of doubt, finally answered. And it had all started with a simple act of kindness. In a quiet garden, that was humanity's true gift to the galaxy. Not their technology or their resources or their military strength, but their refusal to give up on anyone. Their stubborn insistence that every person, no matter how different, deserved a voice. That was what made humans special. That was why they had been accepted at last, not because they were powerful, because they were kind. And in a galaxy full of wonders, kindness was the rarest wonder of all. Hyan reached over and took Yuna's hand. She squeezed back, and they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other across the vast emptiness of space. Two people who had proven that no one ever needed to be alone. The twin suns rose over Syrah, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. A new day was beginning. A new chapter was starting. And somewhere, in schools across the galaxy, children were learning a new language. A language of hands and hearts. A language that did not need sound to be heard. A language that humans had given them. A gift that would echo through the stars forever.